What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here to provide a bit of a crash course on using public data and pitfalls you can run into when comparing win rates when they're not quite applicable. The reason for this video is last week I saw a Reddit post that was mentioning that Bel'Veth had a 5% win rate lift if you picked the adaptive force stat shard instead of the attack speed stat shard. And while it might be totally true that adaptive force, and it probably is actually true that adaptive force is the better stat shard than attack speed, 5% is probably not the real win rate lift here. And I want to talk about some ways that you can navigate, if you're so inclined, sources of public data, sources of win rate data overall, and ways to account for the fact that there's obviously, or I should say oftentimes, going to be biases in the things you're looking for. Ways to get around that and still get some useful information yourself regardless. So we've got 3 case studies here. We've got Ambessa on your screen right now. We're going to talk about Bel'Veth, and we're also going to talk about Senna in terms of ability rank ups. So first things first, the Ambessa case study is around recommended items. So there's 2 biases here with items that I want to call out. Number 1 is that your slot 1 item tends to be about 0.5% win rate lifted. This will vary a bit by champion, how expensive it is and whatnot, but via the fact that you actually completed an item and thus got that far into the game, you are more likely than not to be on the winning team because you didn't lose before finishing your first legendary. The small piece is there, but it does matter. You get a small win rate lift there, so keep that in mind. The other one, though, is actually kind of the bigger one, is whether or not your recommended item has a pretty big impact on what the win rate of the items are. The rule of thumb I use is that a rec item has roughly a 2% win rate tax on it. And what's weird is most times I measure this, regardless of how easy or hard the champion is to play, the 2% rule of thumb seems to hold up, which is kind of weird. You wouldn't expect that to be true. You'd expect someone like Cassante or Shaco, who requires a lot more mastery than somebody like Ash or Misfortune. You still end up seeing the same thing, which is kind of odd, but it is usually true. Again, not in every single case, but it's usually true, so I find that kind of interesting. So Ambessa, and just to show that this isn't a data aberration, because sample size is kind of low at 10,000 games, the rec items changed. I changed them in 15.11. What I had noticed when I was digging around doing something else was that Ambessa still had a recommended items override from back when she launched. And so I unchecked the box to say, please don't force override. Please just go to the data-driven, whatever's popular model. And so in 15.11, I think without telling anybody, the rec items shifted. And so it's like a pure, natural experiment where the thing happened but no one was told, and we get to observe all the results. And I've done this many times, gone through and changed recommended runes, recommended items, things like that. And the roughly 2% main tax just tends to be pretty accurate at the median. So just to kind of verify that it's not a sample size issue, we'll compare 15.9, 15.10, which is no difference at all in treatment here. And we can see that Eclipse went up 0.3% win rate. We look at Cyclosword went up about 0.3% win rate. Now, I want to point out, with a 10,000 game sample, your expected variance here, 95% of the time, plus or minus 1% win rate. So statistically indistinguishable from one another, but you can see pretty clearly from case A and case B, we're seeing like a solid 3.25% win rate lift. And you're like, wow, okay, wow, Voltaic Cyclosword appears to be a stronger item than Eclipse. All these idiots going Eclipse when they shouldn't be, they should go Voltaic Cyclosword. It's clearly the best item. And you can compare multiple patches of data and be like, well, it's enough to actually look at Spear of Shojin with 7,000 games this patch, 7,000 games the patch before, like, well, it's probably not better than Eclipse, especially if you already know about the mains tax, but regardless, okay, Voltaic must clearly be great, right? It must clearly be great. Here we go. Let's turn off the rec items. Oh. And so we move over to 15.11. And by the way, if you're worried about variance, obviously we see that the pick rate doubled, right? Went from a 3.25% pick rate to 7.25, 10,000 games to 20,000 games. We say, well, what if that's variance? Okay, 15.12, same information, right? Same information of, well, the win rate is up by about 0.5, 0.8% win rate. So, and again, that's roughly within just variance. So statistically indistinguishable from the same win rate as Eclipse. Might actually be stronger, might actually be weaker, but hey, by the way, you turn off rec items and like that, you just Thanos snap 3% win rate off the item. Just before, after, before, after. Win rate's just gone. What happened to Eclipse? Basically nothing, right? It's moving as much as it was patch over patch in the first place, about 0.3% per patch. Can you measure anything? Not really here. We get, Spear of Shojin at 2-ish% pick rate. Nope. We start seeing Voltaic Cyclosword eat a bit of pick rate here. Nope, Shojin still doesn't seem to be, performing any differently. Just, hey, we found out snap some win rate. Guess what? Turns out when you're a recommended item, the win rate disappears in a lot of cases. Now, the second thing to bring up around first slot items or items in general is there's also a winning tax. Now, that one's going to be a lot harder to measure out on its own. Again, it's not really hard to just figure out what, 0.5% win rate. You can look at champions like Ezreal or whatever, and where they only ever build Trinity Force, and you compare the Trinity Force item win rate to his champion's win rate, and you're like, well, I can figure out, you can factor out the rest of the games, no problem. These are just bound to one another. Still, what you see is, roughly this, about 0.5% win rate. And again, the tax here. The winning tax, of course, is a lot tougher to deal with, right? Because how do you properly measure the winning tax? There are some people who like to do it. I'm going to shout out Coachless, who does a pretty decent job here, that website, of it tries to account for how much a team is winning and then say, well, we think you're winning by this much. Here's what, your win rate was going to be. I'm simplifying a little bit, but it's close enough here. Here's what we thought your win rate was going to be. Then you bought the item. Did you win or lose? And if you get enough games, you can get a pretty good look at what you think is actually going on there. It seems to, for example, indicate that Magi's is slightly under-purchased, that in games where you were winning and buying Magi's, it actually lifted your win rate up, which makes sense. It's not you buy it always, but it's like, well, if you're winning hard enough to buy Magi's, it actually can materially lift your chance of winning over going for your death cap or an NLR or whatever, which again makes sense, but it's worth noting that, hey, by the way, there is a real positive attribution there, at least according to that one data source, but I find it interesting. Regardless, again, the winning tax is very, very real, and so seeing a lethality item in slot 1, for example, and it's got a higher win rate than Eclipse, the more default option, not a big surprise. In a similar boat here, I don't truly believe Ionian Boots are 5% win rate higher than Steel Caps, or 3% higher than Steel Caps, or 1% higher than Steel Caps, based on when you measure it. Good luck, have fun with that one. But it's more likely to be a winning tax, where you're winning by so much, you take the greedy option, you try to carry the game. In fact, going for a greedy carry option when trying to carry is, I would say in a lot of cases, the right choice to do. But it's worth noting that if you're getting beat up, going for Cyclo Sword because the win rate is 0.8% higher, going for cooldown boots because the win rate is 0.6% higher, or 4% higher, whatever, may not actually be the right choice there, but wanted to bring that one up. So next thing to bring up here is the other version of the main tax, and it's talking about Bel'Veth. So this is 30 days, all ranks, and the things to point out here are the keystones. This is Press the Attack, this is Lethal Tempo, and this is Conqueror. The big things are, look at the pick rate here, and look at the win rate here. And you notice that, okay, Conqueror, 4-9.1, that's a pretty reasonable win rate for Bel'Veth, who is, probably slightly on the strong side, one of the winninger champions in Emerald Plus. 49% for Bel'Veth in all ranks when there's room to optimize. Not a bad win rate at all. But regardless, 80% of players go Conqueror. A small portion of them go Lethal Tempo, and even smaller portion go Press the Attack. But enough games where the sample size is not insignificant. And hey, the win rate being higher than Conqueror is not just variance. I understand the icons are not on the screen. It's to fit everything, and I don't want to change my zoom levels. Apologies. Hopefully you'll bear with it here. It'll get better in a second. But the thing that the Reddit post pointed out was the 5% win rate lift here between going for an attack speed shard and going for the adaptive force shard. And again, the sample quite large, 75,000 games, 240,000 games. This is not variance. There's clearly some combination of winning or other factors that is not RNG for why this win rate's here. I want to call your attention, though, to the right-hand side of the screen. And unfortunately, I just realized my webcam is blocking it. So let me drag myself right here. You'll notice the exact same 5% win rate lift from Scaling Health and Flat Health. Spoiler alert, Flat Health is not 5% of win rate. Even if this rune did literally nothing at all, and you came and said, here's 65 base health, have fun, that would still not be 5% of win rate. So by the way, there's something else going on that's not just simply, hey, variance and hey, the actual power of the rune. In fact, what you're probably going to see, and when you look at the pick rate data and the numbers and whatnot, is, oh, the people who go flat health on Bel'Veth are probably the players who are also smart enough to go adaptive force and customize the rune pages. So not only do recommended items have a win rate tax and whether or not they're a recommended item, but recommended runes are in the same boat. And we can dive into that a little bit. So first of all, let's show Conqueror players. There we go. It's people who went Conqueror in the last 30 days playing Bel'Veth. What you're seeing is, again, to be fair, this exact same 5% win rate gap. And over here, you're seeing in the health shard about a 5% win rate gap. I have not shown you anything unique or special just yet. But what I want to call out is what you saw right here. What you see right here is a over 2% win rate gap between Lethal Tempo and Conqueror, and an over 2% win rate gap between Press the Attack and Conqueror. Now, let's keep using this bottom bar right here of people who are smart enough to say, hang on a second, I want to go run Adaptive Force. Here's Conqueror, again, about 1/4 of players, matching the overall play rate as well. We look at Lethal Tempo Bel'Veth players, and suddenly, none of them are mains. There aren't any Bel'Veth mains who go Lethal Tempo because it's actually not all that good on her. But what I want to call out is let's compare like for like. Let's say you are a recommended runes player on Bel'Veth. Well, if you're going to run recommended runes on Bel'Veth and you run Conqueror and all the normal stuff with 98% pick rates in all the places, you have a 48% win rate on the attack speed shard. And if you run the recommended rune page and 48% and change here on the health growth, right? But attack speed is the one I care about, 48%. You go to lethal tempo, and what do you see? Well, a 1.2% win rate drop, because we're now measuring the same players. We're measuring the kind of person who picks Bel'Veth, clicks Rec Runes, and doesn't do anything else. And they either pick the Rec Runes Conqueror page, there's two, one with Red Second Tree, one with Inspiration Second Tree, and there's a Lethal Tempo recommended page. And both of those come with attack speed. What you're seeing is a 1.2% win rate drop, which is not the same as the 2.2% win rate drop we just saw a second ago. Right? 1% of that win rate drop is accounted for by the fact that some of the Conqueror players actually change the rune page around and thus actually play Bel'Veth. Almost none of Lethal Tempo players are in that cohort. In fact, we can do even more comparisons, and we could say, hey, what about all these Press the Attack Bel'Veth players, right? We go back here and we say, hey, Press the Attack looked like the best rune by like 2.7% win rate. That's pretty meaningful, isn't it? Well, you look over, and of the Press the Attack players, oh, right, more than half of them are the ones smart enough to go for Adaptive Force. And again, there's still the attack speed cohort. Sample's getting a little bit tight here, and you're seeing, again, still this 4-ish% win rate. Again, sample's small enough that it's statistically indistinguishable from a 5% win rate lift. But if you start doing some comparisons, you're like, well, attack speed shard Conqueror is 48. Attack speed shard lethal tempo is about 47, give or take, and Press the Attack speed shard is about 49. Oh, it's about 1% win rate off in each case. Again, I'm kind of rounding here, but we're going from, again, over 2% win rate between here, over 2% win rate here, to being like, oh, it's about 1% each. And we can compare like the adaptive force power of PTA, 53.5. Okay, again, -3, sure. And here, oh, 52.8. And it's like, oh, if I'm a Bel'Veth player who actually goes in and edits her runes, aka I probably play Bel'Veth, the power level, essentially, of Conqueror Attack Shard is, again, around 53, and of PTA Attack Shard is about 53.5, and functionally, statistically, indistinguishable from the same power level as Conqueror. So what that means is there really a 5% win rate lift of doing this? Maybe not. A lot of what we're seeing is, are you good enough to be a Bel'Veth main? Because across all of these, immediately the whole thing is going to shrink. Now, that said, unless I forget to do it on the day of, I likely won't. I even put a meeting on my calendar for it. In time for the 25.14 branch cut, I'm going to change the recommended Bel'Veth runes to change her lethal tempo page out for a Press the Attack page, and on all these pages, change out attack speed for adaptive force. But I wanted to kind of bring up, hey, by the way, especially when something smells fishy, like a 5% win rate lift on flat health, that is not real. There's no way that's real. A way to kind of investigate that and be like, hey, by the way, there's stuff going on here. And so doing things like filtering by keystone and whatnot can be very, very helpful. And though, of course, you're cutting down and down and down on your sample size, what you're actually going to see is a way to hopefully control for a skilled player who is not running into the mains tax. Final thing to bring up here is investigating, for example, a support. So this is Senna's ability orders over the last 30 days in support specifically. And I picked her because basically every single one of them maxes Q. And so you have a really, really good robust sample. Senna's a pretty popular champion. Most of them don't go QE, they go QW. And so you've got like really, really top heavy, very concentrated pick rate, which is useful here because what I'm going to talk about is the fact that this is entirely untrustworthy and you should not use it. I am unsure if other pages do similar things here, but I want to call out that this is entirely, I don't want to say entirely, it is somewhat untrustworthy. Please be careful. So this is the rank up tax. So the rank up tax is the fact that getting far enough into the game, much like actually completing one item and being like, hey, by the way, we saw that Ambessa players who complete their Eclipse win more games than Ambessa players who don't. Well, yeah, she finished an item, she didn't lose the game. Showing up in this chart at all means you got high enough level that some system somewhere thinks you are maxing W second. And this probably means at least getting level 8, for example. So if you do the math and you say, hey, how many QW Sennas are there? How many QE Sennas are there? And then how many Sennas learned Q at level 5, aka you maxed Q, let's be real. Well, turns out you're missing about 66,000 games, which is 6%. So this is, right, 1.09 million. This ends up being like 1.025 million. Again, about 66,000 games, or about 6% of this game sample is not counted in here because you didn't get high enough level to then get to put enough points in W or E to make this web page, or maybe some others, convinced that she was W second or E second. And unsurprisingly, games where Senna doesn't reach level 8 or 10 or whatever will tend to be losses more often than not. And so what you're going to see here is that the win rate of Qmax Senna is 48.1, and then you can say, well, yeah, if you use your abilities wrong and you max the wrong thing, you go down to 47. If you do your things right and you max them correctly, you go up to 49. The problem is the sample is so disparate here that this total sample is a win rate of 49.18%. There is a full 1% win rate lift compared to this data to this data. And this will generally hold true for any support in the game. It's less pronounced for non-supports, of course, but also worth pointing out that Senna is one of the greedier supports where she's going to get kills. She's going to, yeah, she's not really good early game, and so she can be underleveled by getting killed. That's also real as well. But she's also someone who will like happily soak minion waves instead of roaming and gain XP. If you're a roaming support like a Nautilus or a Blitzcrank or something, it's much more likely that you didn't reach level 8 in a surrender or whatever and didn't get those levels on time, and so you're going to have an even larger disparity. So using Senna as an example, there's again a full out like 1% win rate lift compared to I learned Q at level 5, thus I probably maxed Q, to here's my total cohort of games where the game was really sure I maxed Q and then thinks it knows what my second max is. I want to kind of call that one out as well. What was oh yeah, there's one other point here, which was that there are also some champions where they do weird stuff. I have no more tabs for this, so there's no more visual aids, but there are plenty of champions where they put 3 points in a core skill and then max something else. So Karma is an example of 3 points Q into max E. You can have stuff where Lulu does the same thing, 3 point shield and maxes W. Those are going to be even more weird because for a game to be convinced that you're maxing one thing but second ranking another, you've got to at least get to those 4 points there as well, right? And so if you're looking at any kind of given public data source, you might end up having another bias there of it being even farther ahead where you have to be another one level up to convince some website of how it works. And that can further increase the observed win rate because you have a survivorship bias of actually winning enough to get to that point in time. Final thing to bring up as well, just in general, because people still get this kind of wrong, is sample size. Really, generally speaking, the percent doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you're like, well, of course that thing happened. It had a 0.2% pick rate. Yeah, but if 0.2% is like 10,000 games, guess what? That's still 10,000 games. That's a pretty good sample, actually. The rule of thumb I will use and impart to you, because it's easy to remember, is 10,000 games is plus or minus 1% win rate. So, hey, by the way, I'm pretty confident with plus or minus 1% win rate that trying to W max on Senna is pretty bad and is like a 50 or 44% win rate build. Pretty similar for Emax Senna is looking pretty bad. Now, of course, there's a version of Senna where she's like, learning at the wrong level. Sure, okay. But yeah, the point is, right, when you go out to any of these things, you say, well, yeah, it's only got a 6% pick rate here on press the attack. It's, you can't really use that. No, there's 20,000 games of admittedly mostly Bel'Veth, actual Bel'Veth players doing it, but you can still parse through it and be like, well, look, I'm trying to control for, I'm smart enough to go take an attack damage shard, and I compare it to something else that takes the attack damage shard, and like, yeah, the sample sizes themselves are 6 times as large, but when I see the numbers and they're about the same, like, no, I'm actually pretty confident that someone who is willing to make a custom rune page on Bel'Veth, in both of these cases, we're seeing pretty similar win rates. Okay, this is probably pretty good. Whatever the pick rate is doesn't really matter. There's enough games where it's not variance. It might be something else. Again, plenty of other taxes and biases out there, but that's the point. That's the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.